Today I want to talk about food in rural Alaska, what we ate, how we got it, and how we kept it fresh, and anything related to food. So while I'm doing my normal daily stuff, I'm just going to be talking to you about food that we had out in McCarthy, Alaska. Keep in mind that different areas of Alaska are going to get their food differently. For example, Ocean Islands, it's going to have to be flown in somehow. Fairbanks or something, it's not rural, it's a city, but you still have to consider access to food and access to fresh stuff. So there's going to be some variation around Alaska. Again, my experience is in McCarthy, in the middle of Wrangell St. Elias National Park, and then later in Valdez, Alaska, which is at the southern end of the oil pipeline. So let's talk about some food. So the first question is, what did we eat most often out in McCarthy and then in Valdez? So first of all, there's no restaurants or grocery stores in McCarthy. None whatsoever. I'm going to take that back. While I was there was no grocery stores, and during the summer, which was about 3 months, May to September, there were a couple of restaurants because it was a tourist town that had it was in the national park, so people would come out and see the historical town. So there was a burger and french fry place. It was like a standing room only kind of a place. And then there was McCarthy Lodge and Kennecott Glacier Lodge. And those were mainly for the people who were staying in the hotels there. Because, again, tourists. So the meals were pretty out of reach in price-wise for people who were there. And oh, you know what? I remember there was actually a campground too, and they did grilled food as well. Yeah. So there were a couple of options during the summertime if you really wanted to spend $15 or $20 a person for a burger and some chips or some fries. Yeah. But mostly people cooked out of their pantry. So I am standing in my pantry. It looks kind of messy from this angle, but I'm gonna change that so it looks more organized here. So you can see what kind of things we used in McCarthy a lot, okay? All right. So both when we lived in McCarthy and when I lived in Valdez, we mostly bulk shopped at Costco. In McCarthy, that meant about an 8-hour trip to get to Costco, and then, of course, 8 hours back. So usually we would try to combine that with literally anything else that needed to happen in the big city, which was Anchorage. So we would usually drive out one day and spend the night, maybe take care of any mechanical things that needed to happen. And then in the morning, we would go to Costco. Costco sometimes didn't open until 10, so it was a little bit of a tight squeeze. Then we'd grab lunch and drive back. We tried to only go, in the summer you could go every few months or so. You could go in May and September or something, or maybe even a mid-summer trip. In the winter, it was much more spread out. So you basically stocked up as much as you could, so that as you needed it, it was just already there in your pantry. And I've definitely taken that to heart in how I stock my pantry even now. So a lot of the stuff that you see here is stuff that we would almost always have on hand in McCarthy. So we would go to Costco, get a whole bunch of stuff, and bring it home. And we ate from our pantry. There was very little fresh stuff available. But I'll just kind of give you a quick tour of the things I have here that you would definitely find in our McCarthy home, and then, yeah, in the Valdez home as well. Although Valdez had a grocery store. It was a Carr's, which is kind of like it's the same brand as a Safeway. And here in Iowa, you would consider it a really small Hy-Vee. It was a small grocery store, and the prices, of course, were jacked, but that was their only place to shop in town. So, yeah. And they had fresh stuff, although it could be interrupted by road closures, especially in the winter. So, you learned how to cook from your pantry up there as well. So, all right. The first thing that you may not find in people's pantries nowadays very often is shelf-stable milk. We use this all the time in McCarthy, especially because it meant that we could have milk and not need refrigeration because we did not have refrigeration. So basically, if we opened up a container of milk, we made sure to use it within the first day or two so that it wouldn't go bad. Hi, Rosie. Oh, that's not a good apple. Let's get a new one. All right, we got a better apple for Rosie. She doesn't want the good apple. She wants the bad apple. I'm videoing. Can you go away?
Okay, Mom.
I'm videoing. Can you go away?
Okay.
Thank you. So, we also had a lot of drink mixes. This one is iced tea mix, and we don't actually use it a whole lot here because I don't use a whole lot of sugar in our diet, but it was nice to have like Tang or lemonade or iced tea in McCarthy because otherwise it's just water. People would buy pop and store that, but yeah, it was, you didn't get like fresh juices that much or anything like that. No, you don't want that? Okay, we'll set it. Of course, stock up on condiments like mustard, mayonnaise, ketchup, things like that. One thing that my mom did one time was instead of buying a jar of mayonnaise, it's okay. She actually bought individual packets, and then when we wanted mayonnaise on something, we would just open up an individual packet, and that meant that we didn't have to worry about the mayonnaise going bad before we used it. So I thought that was kind of an inventive way. Ketchup and mustard can totally sit out. We had a lot of canned meats. This is chicken breast. I have tuna. I have pork. And I have pink salmon, which if you ask an Alaskan, this is dog food. Pink salmon is not considered a very delicious people food, but it makes just fine fish patties, and people will eat it. They just won't admit to it. So we made sure we had a lot of proteins available. Spam is a huge one. This is, of course, Aldi brand because it's cheaper. But we actually use a lot of Spam. We couldn't save bacon or anything like that unless it was winter. So, Spam, definitely good. Pilot bread, not so much, honestly. A lot of people were like, oh, you gotta have the Alaskan pilot bread. We just had saltines. Alright, so then Costco sells like 8 packs of veggies. And we would get beans and corn and olives and tomatoes, and then we would get the fruits like peaches and pears, and we would get fruit cocktail, things like that. Anything that was like sweet and had some vitamin C. Oranges, mandarin oranges, we would get a lot of that. And we would keep that where we could use them for, sometimes we would do this like a skillet bake. We didn't have an oven during a lot of my time in McCarthy, so we would basically make like an apple bread with a pancake mix, or like a peach cobbler with pancake mix, but we would do it like on the stove top. And so you had to use really low heat and a lid in order to cook it that way. But that's how we did it. I know you want to get down. Let me see if I can go interest her in something else. Yeah. Okay. Let's get you doing something else. So dry mixes, we were actually more likely to have dry mixes like pancake mix and cornbread mix instead of actually like flour and sugar and stuff like that to make them. Mostly because about half the time we didn't have an oven. During the time we did have an oven, we would actually get mixes for baking as well because it was more convenient. It was easier to store things like that than it was to get flour and sugar and salt and baking powder and make it. I don't know why. That's just what we did. Other people did it differently. You can totally do it differently. How I do it now is I have a bin of flour. Flour is right here. I have sugar. I have rice. We had a ton of rice. And we almost always got jasmine rice because it was nice to have that extra flavor when you were sometimes limited on what you could add to it. Hi, Rosie. Are you back again? Come here. Yeah, come here. For breakfast, we often had, pancakes were a very common one because we wanted something warm. We did not have a whole lot of cereal, as you can probably see here in the frame. I don't actually have that much cereal, and that's probably a throwback to growing up out there. We just didn't eat a whole lot of cereal because cereal requires milk, and milk is this stuff. So it does taste a little bit different. It's definitely something to get used to. So if we had cereal, there was just not much. We would do oatmeal a lot and mix in dried fruit like raisins. I have a bunch of raisins over there. My kids just went through a whole entire pack this morning. And then we have a ton of crackers and pasta and ramen noodles and dried beans and stuff like that. Because you could, with the dried beans, you just add it to the pot that's going on your wood stove and cook it all day long, and it really adds. It's a good meal. Crackers and stuff like that you can do with cheese, and I'll talk to you about cheese in a little bit. Yeah, and so we used a lot of shelf stable stuff. There was not a whole lot of fresh stuff, but let me run you through some of our favorite things to eat. So some of our favorite breakfasts that we ate pretty much no matter where we were in McCarthy were pancakes. And we would usually just use a Bisquick mix because you just had to add water. You didn't have to add eggs. You didn't have to add milk. Sometimes, I think some of them you have to add oil, but oil was fine, easy to keep on hand. And then we also had a lot of oatmeal, usually with raisins or dried cranberries in it. And our other favorite, and the one that we went back to time and time again, was diced Spam and potatoes. Potatoes will save for a really long time, shelf stable, and onions also. So we would dice up potatoes and Spam and sometimes onions in there, and that was our breakfast. Kind of like a hash, I suppose. We very rarely had bread. My mom, as it turns out now, is celiac, but we didn't know that at the time, but we still just didn't have a whole lot of bread. We did get tortillas. See, bread goes bad faster if you buy it from Costco or something. Tortillas last a lot longer, so sometimes we would have like peanut butter on tortillas, or occasionally like eggs in tortillas, and those were pretty common. And then sometimes we just warmed up whatever we had the day prior for lunch or dinner, and we had that for breakfast. Oftentimes that's how we would get our potatoes for our Spam, is that we would either boil or roast the potatoes the day before, and then they were cold, ready for the next day. So lunch is really dependent on the season. During the summer, I worked for the Park Service as a teenager, and I would usually pack my lunch. I would bring just leftovers from the night before, typically, or I would do something kind of like a grown-up Lunchable, like, yeah, just a second, like crackers, slices of cheese, slices of salami or something, and then I would have that for lunch. Most of the time it was just leftovers from a dinner. In the winter, sometimes we would make a specific lunch that was a little different from breakfast and a little bit different from dinner, but very rarely did we have things like sandwiches. Very rarely did we have anything that people would consider like a lunch food, like salads and stuff. We did have soups, but usually it was because we were also going to be having a soup for dinner. So another thing that we did a lot personally is that we would go over to my friend's place for lunch because her mom baked, and they had an oven. Hang on, can you stop that? That noise is going to get on the video. Thank you. Her mom had an oven, and so she would bake bread, and she had the best bread, and I think that my bread now is pretty similar to what her bread recipe was, and we just loved going over and having some lunch over at their place. They would make like salmon patties sometimes out of that pink salmon, and it was just really good. Plus, she was a really good cook, and she was I spent a lot of time over there. For lunches in Valdez, that was a pretty standard. You could pretty much have whatever you wanted as long as it wasn't winter time with restrictions on what could get in on the roads. So dinners at home were most often one pot meals like soup or stew or chili, and sometimes we would have rice or noodles on the side. We had usually one propane burner that worked, but we would also cook on our wood stove a lot of the time. As long as the wood stove was cranking, we had some kind of food going on it, so that it was ready whenever we were hungry. I did make a video about foods that we ate, so if you want more in-depth stuff on that, you can find that one. But oh, okay. Can you tell her that she can't take down the baby gate because Rosie will get hurt? Thank you, Dominic. Oh, okay. Dominic, can you put the baby gate back up, please?
He's downstairs.
Can you put the baby gate up then, Patrick? Thank you. So, we, management of the family here while I'm doing this. You get a little window in. It's kind of fun, right? All right. So, we, for suppers, soups were a big thing. And then if we weren't having a soup, it was usually some other kind of a one-pot meal. If you wanted to cook up like a roast or something, which was not very common, we didn't usually have fresh meat. But if we did have fresh meat, especially during the winter, because in the winter, and I'll get to the food storage thing in a little bit, but you could keep it outside basically, and keep it cold, and we would also sometimes trade with people. And they'd give us a roast if they had gotten a moose. And so then we would have a pot roast type of a thing. And all of that was done on the stovetop, unless we were in a place where we had an oven, and then we could do an oven. Some of the places had wood stoves that were big enough that you could actually fit, I'm going to blank on the name. Those cast iron pots that have the top on them, the lid on them with the cast iron lid, and a Dutch oven. So some of our places we could actually fit a Dutch oven into the wood stove, but not all of them had wood stoves big enough for that. So a Dutch oven, how you do that, it's basically a pot, cast iron pot. You put whatever you want in there, and yes, we made like oatmeal bread and stuff like that too. You put whatever you want in there, and then you put the lid on. You hollow out an area in the wood stove and move all the coals over to the side so that you can fit it in there, and then with tongs you grab some coals and you put it on the top. You don't want this to be a real hot fire, otherwise you're going to burn all of your food. Another thing that you can do is just accept that the bottom of your food is going to get burned, and then just anticipate cutting that part off, especially with breads and stuff like that. So we would sometimes do that. Another thing that we did often, especially during the winter, is that it gets kind of lonely out there, and people would just visit each other's homes and share meals. And so if people came over to our home, they would come and they would have some soups and stuff, and other people, bless you, had resources that we didn't. So if we went over to my friend's house, she had a lot of stuff that was baked. She had bread, she had pies, things like that, because they had a good working propane oven. And then our church would have, every Sunday, we would have a really big lunch after church. Everyone would just bring whatever they had and we'd have it together. And then dinner was lighter on those days. But we had a lot of get-togethers in the winter there. So it was kind of a community event. And that was really nice. That's one of the things I do kind of miss about living out there. Hi, Lizzie. There you are. Hi. So let's talk about where we got our food. I know I already told you that we got a lot of our food at Costco, and that is 100% true. Almost all of our food we got at Costco, or later when I lived in Valdez, we got it at Cars. Just a simple grocery store, just like you would find anywhere else, except a lot farther away with a much more limited selection. So, what about the rest of it? I mean, we're in Alaska. There's like, primo wild game and stuff like that. Did we ever eat that? Absolutely. Yes. But my family was not quite set up for doing that ourselves. And so a lot of our protein, because, I'm talking about things like salmon and halibut and moose and bear and all of that, goat, a lot of that was either given to us by people who just had too much to fill their freezer, or it was traded for, or we bartered and worked for it some other way. So we got a bunch of salmon one year because down in the Copper River, which was about 2 hours away, there are Copper River red salmon. And when the salmon run is going on, they have fish wheels. Fish wheels are these giant, like, paddle things that have baskets on them that literally just scoop the salmon out of the river and dump them into a holding basket for people to go and grab. Now, the native community there has special permission to do this, and I'm not sure exactly like what the hours or timing or whatever it is. It's called subsistence hunting and fishing. And as part of a rural community, we actually got some special permission to do that as well. But our special permission ended up being more of a shared situation. Do you need help with her?
Of course, it just keeps going.
Rosie, can I stay here? Can I stay here, little one? So our community actually shared a fish wheel one summer. And so my mom and I and my brother went out to Copper Center, and Rosie, come here, honey. We got like 2 hours on the fish wheel. So whatever was caught in those 2 hours, we could take and go and preserve at home. So we ended up, I don't know, I want to say we got like 15 salmon. It's been a long time since I was there, so my numbers are hazy, but we got quite a few salmon, and that meant that we could smoke and can up those salmon, which we did with the help of a friend of ours who had the setup. Unfortunately, a lot of that went bad because he wasn't doing it quite the proper way. And as a person who does canning now, I'm fairly certain that he was just water bathing the salmon, which definitely results in a lower quality product. A lot of our protein was provided just by being in the right place at the right time. One time we were at the crossing of the Kennecott River, and some hunters had just come down from the mountains, and they had gotten a goat, but they had too much to fit in their cooler, and so they had just like a gallon Ziploc worth of goat bits, complete with the hair, because it had just been field dressed. And they were like, hey, we have no way of keeping this cold, or anything, do y'all want it? And we were like, heck yeah. So we took it home, rinsed off the fur, or hair, whatever you want to call it, and we had a goat pot roast that night, and it was delicious. It really was. It was maybe a little tiny bit gamey, but otherwise very, very good. Oftentimes we would be given bits of moose meat, or my mom would buy it from somebody who had gotten a moose, so that we wouldn't have to go drive all the way to Anchorage to get our protein. If somebody got bear, black bear is great, grizzly bear is not. So if there was black bear, we definitely ate black bear. It tastes really good, kind of a mixture between beef and pork. Really tasty as a roast. Moose is better as ground, in my opinion. And then another thing that my brother hunted a lot was ptarmigan, or spruce hen, or honestly what we called them was stupid chicken. Because you could pull up right alongside it on the road, and you could you didn't even really have to hunt those dang things. You could just reach down and grab them real fast, because they would just kind of sit there, and then wring them necks, and then you stepped on their bottom in a particular way and yanked up on the wings, and all of the skin and the feathers came off. You could cut off the head and gut them right there, and just throw the stuff off into the woods. And if you had a Ziploc or something with you, stuff them in that, bring them home, rinse them off, and dinner. So he got a lot of stupid chickens that way. Another good way is 22s. He had a 22 that he could use to hunt them, because if they did get startled, they would literally just fly from the road up into like a tree right there and stare at you and wait like a sitting duck to be harvested for dinner. They are about half the size of a standard chicken. So if you wanted like a good meal, you'd have to get 2 or 3. But yeah, so we did do a little tiny bit of hunting, but we just didn't have the big game stuff in order to get the big stuff. But people were very generous with us and shared with us, and we did bartering for all sorts of different stuff. So by now you're probably wondering how we stored everything, and a lot of you are probably going, well, it's Alaska. Outside's the refrigerator, but that's not always true. In the winter, yeah, absolutely, it's either a fridge or a freezer most of the time. But gotta remember, there are also bears that live in Alaska, and you cannot always trust the outside to be a refrigerator or freezer temperature, especially if the sun hits something and kind of causes that greenhouse effect. So let me run you through a few of the things that I'm sure you are wondering about. Eggs. We bought the like 30 pack from Costco usually, or an equivalent amount of dozens, 5 dozens. And then we typically just kept them in whatever area of the house was coolest. So away from sun, furthest from the wood stove, that sort of thing. And we honestly never had a problem with it. You could probably leave your eggs, store-bought even, on the counter for a couple weeks and be totally fine. Even in a traditional house nowadays where the room temperature is about 70 degrees, you could still get by with it. If you have a cellar or something in the basement, like I have a basement, if I needed to keep washed store-bought eggs cold, sorry, I've got a stuck sneeze, I would probably put them in my basement because it's probably 10 or 20 degrees cooler down in the unheated part or the less heated part of the basement than it is in the rest of the house. So, about all the other stuff. So, excuse the mess here. I was trying to figure out how I could illustrate something to y'all about how we kept things cold, and this is the best thing I can come up with. So, try to make sure I'm in the frame here. In our kitchen, I don't really know if you would consider it a kitchen, in the back part of our cabin, we had, so it was a 12 by 16 cabin. Near the front door was the wood stove, and at the back of it was like a kitchen counter, and then the stairs, ladder up to the second floor. And then in the floor, there was a hatch. There was a portion of the plywood floor that just lifted up on a hinge. There wasn't even a hinge. It had like a hole in it. You stuck your finger in, and then you lifted it up, and then you could actually move it and prop it somewhere else. So that hole in our floor was probably 3 by 3 feet. So, I mean, decent sized. And so underneath our cabin was about 3 feet deep, like a foundation that was dug into the ground. And so when we opened up that hatch, there was 2x4s surrounding it. My mom drove nails into the sides of the 2x4s like this, and left them sticking out a decent way. And then what we would do is we would just grab, just grabbing what's near me, we would get plastic grocery bags with the handles, and if we needed to keep something cool, like if we needed to keep cheese cool, we would get the big brick of cheese, so if it did start to mold, then we could just cut that off. We put that in the bag, in the wrapper. If we wanted to keep our eggs in there, we could do that. If we wanted to keep an open container of milk, we'd, close it up and put it in there. And then we would just hang it on a nail. and then we would close the hatch on top of it, and it stayed right around 40 degrees in that under the cabin hatch. And you could actually jump down in there and crawl around if we needed to put some other stuff down there, but there really wasn't that much else. We just called it the refrigerator. And so we just have grocery bags hanging with whatever we needed in there. We could pull them out, get what we needed, put it back, and close the doors as quick as we could to keep the heat from the wood stove from getting down there. But really, it was insulated and stuff, so it stayed pretty darn cold down there. And on really cold days, we would put like a towel or something over it so that none of the cold air would seep up and make our feet cold in the winter time. So that is how we kept certain things fresh. And I'm going to go through my fridge here and kind of point out what we would have kept where and whether we would have worried about keeping it in the refrigerator or not. And then I'll tell you what we did with frozen stuff. So here's my fridge, and I'm going to go through it and kind of show you where we would have kept things in McCarthy. So I do have some open pantry milk. We would have kept that in the hole in the refrigerator in McCarthy. And the light's gonna keep doing its crazy thing, so I guess we'll do like this. And then I'll just pull them out. I have yogurt in here. We would not have been able to keep yogurt. We just never bought yogurt. It just doesn't keep well enough, and the times that we tried, it just swelled up and it was gross. Bagels, if we got them, we would have kept them on the counter. These are homemade, and that's why they're in here, because they're waiting until Tuesday. But we just wouldn't have had stuff like that. Leftover hot dogs from the other day. We would have just thrown those into a meal. We would not have tried to save them. We never bought things like sour cream or cottage cheese because they would go bad too quickly. If we got fresh vegetables, we would keep them down in the fridge in the hole, but we would eat them really fast because even down there, they just don't last very long. Instead of getting shredded or sliced cheese, we would get cheese in big bricks, and so then we would just wrap it back up in the plastic and we would put it down in the hole, and if it started to mold, we would just lift it up and trim that mold off and toss that in the fireplace and eat the rest. Mold was never a worry. So we just cut it off. If we had eggs, like I said, we would usually store them down in the hole, but sometimes we would just leave them out on the counter, depending on how fast we would eat them. That's my alarm for my door. It's a fancy fridge. We almost never got things like lettuce because it would oftentimes freeze on the way to our place out in McCarthy. So things like lettuce, these little tomatoes, I've got bell peppers and stuff in there. Those were things that we would try to eat within the first week of getting them if we got them out at Costco. I addressed mayonnaise out in the pantry. We just didn't really use mayonnaise until my mom got those little individual packets, and that was much easier. Leftover things, this is an apple cake that I made for my husband that he keeps forgetting. We just didn't keep leftovers. We just ate them before we made anything else. Same with things like, this is some leftover chicken from last night. We would have immediately, may have been able to stay overnight down in the hole, but then the next day we would be making food out. We would be making soup or something else out of it. Pickles, they would just stay on the counter. If you started to see mold, it was too late. Don't eat it. I have some pork stock here. We would not have been able to keep that. We would have needed to use that immediately. Broccoli and celery store better down in the hole. So does cabbage, which is the green of choice because it will actually last for quite a while. You want to come give me a hug?
Yeah.
Okay. Carrots and potatoes do just fine on the counter. If you start to see them get a little bit limp, you put them in some cold water and they kind of freshen up. Cauliflower we would have stored down in the hole as well. Alright, on to the big questions. What would we have done with raw meat? We would not have stored that inside. We would have either cooked it and then stored it inside because that's a little bit safer, or we would have asked a friend to store it for us in their freezer. Okay, just a minute, please. Or we would have taken the third option in the winter, and that is to use our outdoor freezer. So here in Iowa, I still have an outdoor freezer. It's my car. So as long as I wasn't parked, or as long as we weren't parked in a place where the sun would amplify the heat in there, we would use our cars as a bear-proof freezer. Because if you just store them outside in the snow, then bears can get to it even. Yes, I know, it's winter, they're supposed to be sleeping. It doesn't always happen that way, plus there's coyotes and other things. So we would use our cars for a freezer for things on a temporary basis. A couple weeks at a time, no more than that really. And you were pretty safe to say that November through March was okay to use your car to keep things pretty darn cold. So access to food was the only thing I haven't covered yet so far, and that is that sometimes things just were not available. And this was actually more common in Valdez, where everyone kind of assumed that the grocery store would have stuff. They just said, oh, well, we've never had a problem getting tomatoes, even though they're not like great tomatoes. We can get them. But in the winter time in Valdez, oftentimes there's a huge snowfall that completely fills the pass. And if the pass is completely filled, then there is no getting groceries in. They say, oh, well, in theory you could run the ferry, but honestly, if the pass is closed, the ferries aren't running either. And so a lot of times people are like, ooh, this is going to get tight. What can we do to mitigate this? You know, it looks like we're having a snowstorm coming. Stocking up the store is actually not going to help because the store's not getting extra shipments in the meantime, and basically you're just hurting the rest of your community. So people don't actually stock up as much, but they do definitely figure out and make do with other things. And people are just they're more used to making do with what they have than we are down here in the lower 48. People down here, they're like, oh, bread, milk, and eggs. Oh no, I'm gonna run out of lettuce, and I don't know what I'm gonna eat, you know. And that's just not the way that it is up in Alaska. And the other thing is, I know that this is the same down here, but it's more true in practice in Alaska. If you run out of something and there is no getting it, your neighbors will help you. And they won't go, yeah, they weren't prepared enough and they didn't buy enough sugar. We had people literally move us in the middle of winter right after Christmas from one place to another. We were new to the area and everything, but we had like 7 families with their snow machines and their sleds come and help us move our few belongings to another place in the dead of winter because we were out of fuel. We had no more water. We had used up most of our winter supply, and we had no way to get anywhere. We didn't have a snow machine. We didn't have access to our truck. It was dead, and people came and helped us. And that is one thing about Alaska, is that you've got to be really tough to live there, but all of the other people that live there are also really tough, and they're willing to come and help you. The smaller the town, the better the community. Dirt roads, as they say, bad roads bring good people. So if you're going to go out and live in the bush, pick somewhere with dirt roads and very few restaurants. So if you have any questions about what we ate, how we ate, food questions, water questions, anything like that, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to either respond there or make another video about it. I gotta get back to my crew because they are about to revolt. God bless y'all. Talk to you later.